Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Inspire Health podcast. And we are super excited to have Paul Selig back with us today. And we're going to get, if people haven't remembered, check out episode 57. I'm going to put a link up for that in the show notes here. I had Paul on back probably about 100 episodes ago from where we are today. And we talked about Paul's book at that time around alchemy. And if you're not familiar with Paul, go and watch that episode. It'll give you more of the backstory on who Paul Selig is. But just overall, Paul's one of the foremost spiritual channels working today. He's written, I believe, about 10 books now, with your newest one, Paul, Resurrection. And we are going to talk about this book today, Resurrection. Paul, we are super excited to chat with you. I think when Tay and I opened up that book, I think we had probably about almost a page of questions after getting through the first 7 pages of the intro. So
it's incredibly moving and powerful. And I've had goosebumps and tears, and we're so excited for this interview, and we so appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
So Paul, where to begin here? After going through the work that you've channeled through with the guides, I think one thing that comes really obvious to me is that most of my life, I've kind of been living within this boundaries of what's probably false, and reading this type of material just keeps it feels like it removes layers and layers of the falsity. And ultimately, I mean, I know for Tay and I, we really just want to live a life that's as truthful as possible. And so I find this kind of information is just so incredibly needed and so valuable. It's been so touching for us. And it's partly why we created a series called The Illusion of Free Choice, A Return to Mastering Your Own Life. And maybe we can start with, what would the guides even say around the concept of free choice in regards to what I even just mentioned around, who's even making the choices? So what's your thoughts on that?
I'm not the guides. I'm not a spiritual teacher, or a guru. I have no interest in being those things, but I take dictation, and I take it a lot. And the books are, transcripts. So, while I have questions around free will, I do know what they say. And they say, indeed, we have choice. We have free will, but it's the aspect of self that's making the choices that needs to be examined. So they talk about the small self, not as a pejorative idea of self. The small self is basically the personality structure, identity that we have that are basically have become indoctrinated through our familial history, the times we're born into, whatever the cultural mandates of the time are. So we always think we're choosing, but we're often choosing in accord with what that sort of box is that we think we're allowed to be choosing from. The guides say we're always ordering off of the menu of what we expect to be there. We don't go beyond that because we haven't been told that it's possible. So, I was told by people well before I started doing this work that I would be doing something like this, or that made no sense to me when I was quite young. And I was like, yeah, right, that ain't gonna happen, and it did. Now, am I fulfilling some higher dictate that I've agreed to? Possibly. Who the hell knows? All I know is I'm told that I have choice. So I made the choice to come join you both for, some time today. And I'm going to make the choice later to, go to the store. I mean, these are things that I'm going to choose to do. The reason I believe we have free choice is there's a few times in my life when my guides have actually sort of intervened. And they rarely do. And they only do it really when I sort of ask for help, but a couple of times I was told, end this relationship. Don't sign that contract. I did. And all hell broke loose because I didn't listen, and I was like, well, I have to sign this contract because people expect me to do this. And all hell broke loose, and I could have saved myself, in some cases, several years of pain had I chosen to listen. But I did what I thought I was supposed to do, or what my small self said, well, you want to do this, you might as well get it, and this is how you get it. So I think we do have free choice, and I don't think that we're sort of plugged into some system where we're just doing, the only possible choice we can make. Because I know that there are other choices. Every day there are things I choose not to do. which make my life much better. And I learned that the hard way by doing things that were harmful to me years ago. So I choose not to do them. I understand choice. I also believe that will is of source. So will doesn't operate independently from whatever you want to call source or God, but can be united with it. So there's this old paradigm I suppose in many religions, thy will, not mine, be done, which is something else knows more than I do. And while I think that that's valuable and true at a certain point, I think mastery or alignment or ascension, if you want to use that word, is very much about aligning will to the higher, so that the aspect of self that is in choice is actually operating from a place of truth, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. And it ties very much, I think, in with the idea of, even in this book particularly, the guides talk a lot about manifestation. And this is book one of the trilogy for manifestation. It sounds like that is like a core principle of manifestation is, like you mentioned earlier, which aspect of the self is the one making the choices. So when we're in alignment with that higher self, that's kind of when things unfold in a different way.
Yeah, we'll learn through whatever we do. And, I do believe we're here to learn. And I actually do believe that the soul has certain encounters or lessons that it seeks to have in a lifetime, which are great opportunities for growth. So I believe all those things are so. But I forgot your question. So forgive me. What was
Can
your
you actually
question?
speak a little bit more about the difference between small self and large self? So, self with a capital S. Can you
Yeah,
make the distinction
I
between
can
those?
try. So the guides say the small self is the personality structure. There's nothing wrong with it. I have one, you have one. There's nothing wrong with it. But they say that, well, this is how I'll try to explain it. When I was in my early 30s, I heard something, and I'm 99% sure I heard it in channel because I didn't understand it, and I wrote it down, and I was struggling at that time. And what I heard was, freedom will come when the throne relinquishes its king. And I was like, what the hell does that mean? But basically, it's the essence of this teaching, which is who's sitting in the throne, who's running the show. So my personality self, who's been basically reared in fear, because all of us are, because this, what they call octave that we inhabit together, made of high and low notes, is infused in fear. So we grow up in a field that's got all these weeds in it, and we just assume that they'll always be there. So the small self knows itself through this. The divine self, they call it the true self, or the aspect of the creator that seeks to realize itself in and through all of us, is unafraid because it can't know fear. It's beyond that. So much of what their work is sort of the realization of who we truly are beyond the idea of self. So the guides say the small self sits in a small throne. And the true self, or the divine self, is expressing in a much different way and in a much different alignment. They call that alignment the kingdom, and they say the kingdom is the realization of the inherent divine in all things. Not just what we want to see. It's not about wearing certain things and using the jargon of spirituality, or even necessarily having a specific practice. It's the knowing that who and what we are is of the whole, of the great source. They say there is one note sung in the entire universe that is sung as all things. It is outpictured or in manifestation as all things, high, low, and in between. So small self knows itself through the old structure, the frame of personality, what it's been reared with, who your parents said you were, what your teachers said you were, what the culture says you are, based on what you do, or the mandates of the culture at a time, and that varies, I suspect, culture to culture. And the true self knows who it is beyond age, beyond gender or ethnicity, or all of these other ways that we learn through. There's nothing wrong with knowing who you are. I know that I'm in a male body right now, and this is how I express, and that's part of my reality. But if I were to go to the truth of who I am, I wouldn't be operating from that limited construct. I wouldn't be ignoring it, but I wouldn't be demanding that be how I'm, expressed, because we're expressed in higher ways.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I know the guides had said in this book, they're saying that we're at a crossroads and humanity has chosen change, and that humanity will triumph, but change is present, and some will not withstand change through their own refusal to acquiesce to the new. Wondering if you can explain a little bit about what's going on in regards to the change and the crossroads that humanity is going through from the perspective of the guides, and what they mean by if we don't acquiesce to that change.
Well, I mean, they talk about change as they've said since the very beginning of their books, which is the first book was channeled in 2009. It was called I Am the Word. They said humanity is at a time of reckoning, and a reckoning is a facing of oneself and all of one's creations. And everything that's been created in fear needs to be recreated, reseen in a higher way. That's how I understand it. So let me see if I can do this. I'm so jet lagged I can't tell you right now, but I'm going to do my best to sort of reinterpret what they're saying. So this is happening both at the level of the individual and at the level of the collective. So in the Book of Truth, which was dictated, I think, shortly before 2 presidential elections ago, I'll put it in that time frame, they said that everything that's about to happen has to do with sort of a reclaiming of what's been buried and denied. And they said everything, it said it's going to be, they said, you know, if you've got something that you buried in the backyard 2 weeks ago or 2,000 years ago, it's all going to be coming up. And it's very hard to live in, you know, what looks like an archaeological dig. But they say everything is being exhumed in order to be seen. Now, to see it isn't to judge it, to make it wrong, to blame. It's to bring it to the light. They say nothing is transformed until it's first brought to the light. And that's part of the action of this time. So the change, they talk about it as a wave of change. And they're saying, you know, you can ride the wave, you can be carried by the wave, or you can struggle against it. Finally, they say everybody's going to get it in one way or another. And I think getting it is a positive thing. You said, you know, you can be woken from your sleep with a kiss on the forehead, or you can get rocked out of your bed. And some of us are going to get rocked out of bed because we don't want to wake up. That's all.
That's a great analogy. Makes me think about how my 17-year-old stepson tries to wake up his 6-year-old sister sometimes in the morning, which is a bit more of the abrupt wake up rather than the kiss on the forehead. But okay. One of the things that the guides say quite often is that from the true sense of self knows who she is, what he is, and how she serves. Can you explain that in a little bit more detail as far as, you know, who are we, what are we, and what does that mean from the regards to how we serve?
That's an attunement. So the claim, I know who I am in truth, I know what I am in truth, I know how I serve in truth, I am free, I am free, I am free, is actually an attunement. And they say this is being invoked at the level of the true self or the monad. They use certain phrases or words interchangeably. They speak about the monad as the Christ, they sometimes say, or the true self or the eternal self, all meaning the same thing. But they say it's the aspect of the creator that seeks realization in and through all of us. It's like the seed of the divine, or that divine spark that seeks its incarnation as and through us, perhaps at the cost of the ideas we hold about who and what we are. So the claim, I know who I am in truth, is a reclamation of identity in a higher way. It's the true self that can evoke that, because the divine self, in fact, knows who it is. So when I say I know who I am, I could say, I am Paul, this is my age, I lost my hair, this is where I live, that's my dog making noise in the background. I can do all of those things and they won't be inaccurate. It's at a level that's perfectly fine to say. But these things are always somewhat transient. I'm not always this age, I'm not always living here, I don't always have a dog in the background. So I know who I am in truth is moving to the eternal truth, or the divine that always knows who it is. They also say the divine knows what it is and how it serves. Now, when they first brought this through, which was in a group that was being held in my apartment probably 15 years ago or something, as an attunement, we thought we understood it. We all sort of got the idea of I know who I am, but we thought what I am meant sort of, you know, how we go about our business in the world. I'm an accountant, I'm a man, I'm a woman, I don't know what I am, it doesn't really matter, you know. So the claim I know what I am in truth is the claim of manifestation. It's the divine as what? The divine as form. Because they say, we come from a system that says if there is a God, and if is the big word, it's up maybe some guy up on a cloud somewhere, or something that's going to smite us or something that loves us, but up there, out there somewhere. And we're stuck in the mud. And the guide said, well, God is the mud. It's all one thing operating at a different level of vibration and tone. So I know what I am is actually a reclamation of form. And they say that you cannot lift to the higher if you've denied the divine in the self. In other words, if I want to deny the divine in my body, I'm also, without even meaning to, denying the divine in form and everything else, in the ocean, in the sky, in the earth. They say again and again, you can't make anything holy, but you can deny the divine in anything. And really what they're doing is they're bringing us past the denial of the divine. So I know what I am as form. I know how I serve. We all thought that meant what we did for a living because we're Westerners and we think in those terms. And if I know what I am, well, I run a yoga studio, so it's spiritual. So it has nothing to do with that stuff. That's just stuff. It doesn't really matter. They say, I know how I serve is, again, the true self or the divine self as it most fully expresses. So the divine as you is how you serve. How God, or whatever you want to call it, has come as and through you and expresses through you. That can be what you do, but frankly, it has everything much more to do with what the guides are now calling presence and being. It's the light that has come as you, shining for all that you encounter. This is not about religion. It's not about proselytizing. It has nothing to do with that stuff. It's really about how we be. So the guides say how one serves is how one most fully expresses as the true self.
I really love the way that in the passage in there when they talk about God being in all things, because it really does then change the way that you interact with everything when you really try to wear that lens and see your reality through. What do the guys say around concepts of darkness, or do they talk about evil specifically? And if so, what's the way that they would suggest to work with that sort of stuff? Because it's definitely a conversation that's out there lots right at the moment. So I like this perspective to look at it.
Well, how they teach about it isn't convenient, that's for sure, They say that we operate in an octave, and they say that an octave is comprised of low and high notes, like any piece of music. It's just all source expressing in different ways, but we do have free will. So what we call evil, they suggest, is the denial of the divine. It's really that simple. And, even with, the idea of sin, they say, well, it's not like, somebody's looking at what you're doing in bed, or that you stole the bread from the store or whatever. Basically, all of these things, they say, are expressions of the denial of the divine, which is about lack and separation and the belief that someone is more worthy than the other. So evil, I suspect, is the intent to harm. I think that's really what I would call evil. But even that is generally somebody operating at a level of consciousness where that's how they express, which is generally born in their experience to separation. They say that's really the only problem we face. Humanity's only real problem is what they call the denial of the divine, which is born in a belief that we're separate from source, or could be. And they say we're not, and it can't be, but we've made it so. So when I think of this stuff, I tend to think about low notes and high notes. When you get into thinking about good and evil, then you move into this whole idea that there's some sort of battle, which I don't get. I really don't get that. I think that that's a convenient way to reinforce separation.
Yeah.
They say again and again, well, they talk about the upper room as the octave above the one that we know ourselves through. So they say any song can be sung in a higher octave. It's about transposition. So who I am at one level of vibration and tone also can express in a higher level. The difference with a higher level, they say, is that fear doesn't express there, and you're not choosing in fear. The upper room they've called Christ consciousness. I don't know if that's what other people are calling 5D, because I actually don't read anybody's stuff around this, but it's this higher realization. It's the octave above. And all of their work is about transposition or lifting the tone to the higher. But the guides have said many, many, many times, you cannot lift the evil man to the upper room because you have made him evil. And if you align to him or her or it at that level, you're in co-resonance at that level. They've said a million times, who you put in darkness, what you put in darkness calls you to that darkness. You cannot be the light and hold another in darkness. It's the hypocrisy of religion. And, when I hear people say, well, I'm a warrior and it's like, well, there are other ways to attend to this. That doesn't mean we don't speak up. That doesn't mean we don't intervene if there's something happening that's harmful. I mean, the guides have said as much. But if you deny the divine in anyone, and denying the divine doesn't mean you agree with them or what they do or how they think or how they vote or any of those things. If you deny the divine in anyone, you have denied it in yourself. It's just that simple. And here's the simplest way they've ever put it. Who you damn or what you damn damns you back. And all that is who you deny the divine in. By expression of that, you've denied the divine in yourself. You've done it to yourself. They're not doing anything. So I can be self-righteous as I wish, and they say self-righteousness is always the small self. It's always the personality self who seeks to be right at the cost of another being wrong. But they also say, what you bless blesses you in return. And when they do this work with people, with groups of people, or even online, people feel it. But I just came back from a retreat, and there's over 100 people. They're all working with this. You can feel the energy when you claim, I know who you are in truth. I know what you are in truth. I know how you serve in truth. They're not speaking to you as the ideas of self, the personality. They're speaking to the entirety of you, which is inclusive of that. But this is spoken to the divine self, the divine as you, come as both of you, either of you, together as separate. So when you bless something, you're actually in receipt of the energy that comes back. People, I think, confusedly believe that blessing is approving or blessing is condoning. I give you my blessing. I condone this marriage that I think is ridiculous. I mean, what crap is that? That doesn't mean anything. They say to bless something is to know the presence of the divine upon it, to see the divine or to know, and to know is to realize the divine where the thing is or the person is or the situation is, which they say actually alters it in structure. To hold the vision of God or the source of all things, whatever you want to call it, upon what you see actually lifts it to the higher tone, because this is really a teaching of co-resonance or entrainments. You're operating at the higher level. You're giving everybody permission to do the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's one of the things I really love about the teachings is that it's really asking everybody to just really see things through new eyes, like through a whole new perspective. And I think they even said, things aren't going to change. Like a trash can's still going to be a trash can, or these different things, but can we have a different relationship with it? And it sounds like we're all getting invited to be able to start that process of can we, can we see anything, especially the stuff that's harder for us to see. It's easy for us to see, we've been doing a practice after reading your book with our kids too, and we've been practicing the idea of seeing the divine in everything. Mm-hmm. And, I said in another interview, it's easy to see it when you're looking at nature and stuff, a lot harder when you see it in the things that bug you. But can we still find that? And in the process, staying open to maybe that might actually start to change things in a whole nother way.
A lot of it's about allowance, and this is where choice comes in. I have a choice about how I see or decide. Much of what I expect to see or believe is born in my memory, my history, my idea of what was and how I was taught to see things. So this is an attractive person, that's not an attractive person based on whatever the tenets are of the moment or the culture, and they vary. So when I make the choice, and sometimes it's a choice, to know the higher in another in spite of what they say or do. I'm actually growing through that, but I think people tend to think that that means we're agreeing to it. So somebody punches me in the nose, I'm saying, oh, bless you. Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if, I think, yeah, if you're really at that level of consciousness where you can do that, that's fine. But the guides have said many times, if somebody steps on your foot, say, please don't step on my foot. And if they keep doing it, call the cops. Really? I mean, it's not, because that's healthy self-esteem.
Yeah, that's
No,
an
that's not
important.
okay. Yeah. So
Yeah,
it's
that's an important point, I think, because it is a lot of times I think people take that as being passive, in sort of like that I'm just going to agree to something that I don't like, but that's not what they're getting at.
no, that's fear. You know, so the guides have said so many times the action of fear is to claim more fear. Every choice we make in fear gets us more of the same. You know, and they make a huge distinction between fear and prudence. Prudence, which is, I think, use of reason, is actually healthy. So if I live on Maui, and if it says shark in the water, best not to go in. It's not, I don't want to get bit. I don't want to get eaten. I don't want to die. I don't have to. So I can choose to say, there's a sign, it's not safe, follow the sign. Or I can choose to say, I will not be frightened of the shark, and then get, eaten up. And then I will have learned through that. You know, we can learn through fear. It's a teacher. It's just not the best teacher, is what I'm being told. So prudence is different than fear. But if I say, if you look at the last choice or any choice that you made in fear because you were frightened, see what it got you. And more than likely, you're going to see that it got you more of the same.
Paul, how did we get here? You speak of the small self is essentially separation from the divine. How did we get so far away from the divine and our true self?
I think it was free will. I think it was free will. I think it was our choice. I think it says, okay, we're going to learn through this now. I don't know that we knew where we were getting. I think we've done the best that we can with how we've chosen. I mean, I hear some of this had to do with a belief in lack or the belief that we wouldn't be supported by source. So consequently, like if I don't think that there's enough food and I start hoarding food, I'm operating in lack. And if in doing so, I starve my neighbor and I say, well, only one of us gets to eat, I've made choices based in fear that are, have the ramification of separation. They said that we became so separate from one another that we forgot that we were of source itself. It's that simple. So I get that we did it, we chose it, we've learned through it, and we've gone about as far as we can go, I understand, in this agreement to separation, that we can go without self-extermination, which is our choice too. And I hear we're not going to do it, but we can. And at a higher level, we all know we can now. The guides said early in their books, the idea that we build one bomb that's bigger than the next in the belief that it's going to keep us safe is absolutely ridiculous. That that's going to keep us safe. It doesn't keep us safe. And they say eventually they're going to go off if you want to keep going this way. And what I understand is humanity's decided they're not going to go off because we don't want to go this route. But the only option really is to lift above the old that we've created. War is a belief in separation. It's generally about who gets the border, and who gets the riches of the world and all. It's all about money and greed, truthfully. I mean, or separation. We have the right to be here, you don't. All of that stuff. And we've perpetuated that. They say we have lived for so long with war that we expect it to be there, so we'll always have it, because they say we're always getting what we expect, like it or not, know it or not. That's manifestation. Manifestation, as they teach it, isn't I'm going to create a vision board and get a bigger condo, or I'm going to make my kid get into the right school if I keep. I don't think it works that way. I think that's the small self trying to get what she thinks the small self should have. And again, you can have those experiences and learn through those things. If I got what I really wanted, I would have been dead 25 years ago. It's not a question in my mind, really. I just wanted, enough money to not have to worry and to party and to all those things. It was a long, long time ago, and I learned a lot through not having anything. And I'm glad I did. So they say, we're always getting what we expect, which basically means we've all got these frames that we're holding up and calling into manifestation what we expect to be there. And that includes everything born in fear and separation. And as we move to the higher and start choosing in that place, we're going to continue to indoctrinate our others and everything we see through the vibration of fear, which is separation. And the guides say even fear is of God, it just doesn't know it. It just doesn't want to be. But it is. So fear operates as denial of the divine. What the guide said recently, which I found really interesting, is they say, no, fear isn't very bright. Fear doesn't lift. Fear is kind of stupid. It's maybe clever, but it's not brilliant. It doesn't shine. And so consequently, it's always seeking to replicate at its own level. And the antidote is never to sort of, I'm going to attack it. You can act in the face of it, which is to move beyond it. Or they say you lift above it. You lift above it to the level where it's not operative. It's not what's dictating one's choices. And then it loses its power because it doesn't exist in the higher. You have to go back downstairs to the lower to have that experience of it.
In the book, the guides mentioned the passage you are undertaking individually and collectively is to a new level of consciousness that you have not known. The splintering of an old reality, the factioning of a people from one country to the next is present now, yes, but it has always been present, and it is now just being seen, and so it may heal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what we're seeing right now, and as far as the chaos all around the world, is this all just rising up to the surface then for us to see it very clearly so that we may then...
And make other choices. And make other choices. Just seeing something and doing nothing about it may not make a damn bit of difference. I can hear the neighbor beating their spouse or their children, but if I don't do something about it, I'm actually saying, oh, well, yeah, that's happening. Isn't that a shame? And turning my face. That would be, I don't think, a very high response. But what they've said is that everything is rising to the surface to be seen so that it may be made new, seen anew, reclaimed in the higher. So, the old paradigm, it used to be we're going to hang the horse thief in the town square and everyone's going to gather around and applaud that and then walk away as if the evil has been vanquished in the town. It never is. It hasn't worked the old way. So the opportunity to change is upon us, and I think we have the choice of being backed up into the corner, which is sometimes what I do, which is I don't want to change, and then I have to change because it's too painful not to. Or I can choose, In 12-step land, they say, I don't remember what the phrase was, but it's like, you can choose, you can get a high bottom or a low bottom, but you're going to hit one, on the way, and there's always a lower bottom to find if you want to find it. And I think that this is a collective act that we're undergoing now. And I don't know that it's going to be necessarily graceful. I don't hear, my guides are very hopeful about humanity. They've said humanity has chosen at a higher level to move beyond this old way of being. And it's going to be a trip. I've heard it's going to take 4 generations. That's what I've heard. And then the New Agers get angry at me. I want it now. I have my beads. I have my crystals. I want it now. Well, I get it. I wouldn't mind it now either. But the idea of 4 generations, when I first heard it, I was like, oh, brother, people are going to be so pissed at this. And they were. But, a friend of mine said, these people that I actually met recently, who I really liked, they were asking us, they didn't know my work, and they were saying, we're feeling despondent about the future of humanity. And they said, Paul, what do your guides say? And I told them what I said. And they said, that's really interesting. When the Jews were left Israel or something, so it was like 40 years. And they said the reason was that it took 40 years to forget that they had been slaves, for the consciousness to be changed beyond what had been old. So I don't know if there's any correlation there. I actually get no. I just asked, I got a head shake no. So that's my anecdote. It's not the guide's teaching. But I feel that this is positive, but I also hear, and I just heard it again, because they're dictating their next book already. They're about 100 pages in, and that was only in 7 days worth of dictation over the last week in front of audiences. I mean, I can't even read the stuff. It's just so overwhelming, and I can't tell yet. But they are saying that what we're moving towards is beyond anything that we've known, because we're still operating through a sense of identity that holds memory of separation. And until we start to release memory of separation, we're going to unintentionally be creating through that. And the idea of union, I don't get that union means I don't have to pay my bills or I get everything I want when I want it. I do get that it is about being in a state of receptivity to source, where I'm not making the choice to deny myself or another, and I'm not, saying, well, God's supposed to do what I want, or whatever you want to call God, and only for me and not for that other person, because I don't think it works that way. They're saying the kingdom is about omnipresence. It's about the realization of the source of all. And in that realization, they say realization is knowing we're met. We're not met by lack and discord in the ways that we've chosen to learn through, because there's another way to learn. So that's my hope, and that's what I hear.
What's the role moving forward then around the concepts around like truth and justice, particularly justice, because it's very paired with punishment.
Yeah.
So what's the take from the guide sort of perspective on that sort of thing?
They've been talking about this for the last 5 books, I think, and they talk about our justice system being basically ineffectual because it's born in this idea of punishment. But the example that I gave you about the horse thief in the town square is how we operate. So I understand it this way. I'm in the rainforest, and there's a great big rainstorm right now, which we may be hearing in the background. What I hear about this is that we're accountable to all of our choices. That's the fact. And that's karma. So if you broke it, you own it, in other words. Yeah. But they don't talk about karma as punishment. They talk about karma as opportunity to learn. There is not any one of us who hasn't done something that he or she regrets, and sometimes regret a whole lot. I did a workshop in Berkeley a week and a half ago, and there was this young woman sitting in the very back row with dark glasses on and her hair sort of over her face. And her question, when she asked it, was basically about, can somebody really ever be forgiven? And the guide said, yes, absolutely yes. But culturally, we want people to pay, and I think I think people learn, and I think that, if somebody is harming other people, I think that it's helpful to stop the harm. But you can't damn the person with that. You can't create a system where there is no opportunity for redemption and no possibility of it, because then you're confirming the very thing that you don't want to see. So, I can't speak to this. Well, I'd have to go into channel and let them do that, because they're much better at this than I am. The best that I can do is try to interpret what I've understood. I'm going to go in and just, because it's a big subject, and see if they want to say anything quickly. And when I do this is just for your viewers, I whisper and repeat, and it sounds ridiculous. They want to know, do they have the right to watch other people? Do they have the right to watch or wish other people to suffer? Does that give them something back? Does that give them something back? It gives them more suffering and pain. It gives them more suffering and pain. You don't realize you are your brother. You don't realize you are your brother or your sister or your sister. You don't realize you are the one you see hurting. You don't realize that you are the one you see hurting because you believe in separation, because your belief in separation extends to this. When you realize you love people, when you realize that you are your brother's keeper, that his or her well-being is your responsibility, is your responsibility to stop one another. You will stop harming one another, and begin supporting one another in higher ways. In higher ways, let justice be God's. Let justice be God's, if you wish to say it that way. If you wish to say it that way, the ramifications of one's choice will ultimately be met in the experience of the one harming others, in the experience of the one harming others. Everybody has to wake up to their actions. Everybody has to wake up to their own actions. Most of the actions you believe are low. Most of the actions you believe or know are born through fear are born through fear. Most of you are operating as if you don't know. Most of you are operating as if you don't know why you harm other people, why you harm other people. You are frightened of them. You are frightened of them. You are frightened that they will not give you what you want or do what you think they should do. So you damn them, so you damn them. And you create an army to damn them. And then you create an army to damn them and feel that you've survived or done the right thing or done the right thing or made it better or made it better. Mostly you've reinforced what you don't see. Mostly you have reinforced what you don't want to see by agreeing to it and claiming it in further darkness, Does that make any sense?
Thank you.
It's part of this transition that's going to be interesting because, like you mentioned earlier, this is really transitioning to a time that no one's ever really seen. So if we do move in that direction, all of these constructs are going to have to take on something that really is like something new is going to have to be created that we don't really know yet. So
at the level of consciousness that doesn't hold the old. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's the problem. I mean, I don't want to take a brick from one prison and build the next prison with it. It's not you're going to have. The seed of the old will be present in what you claim. So they've talked about this a lot, and they talked about this at length before things seemed like they were falling apart all around us. But they've been sort of throughout the last 10 years talking us through these stages, because we're participatory to them, and in fact, we're creating them. There's not some God doing this to us. This is our crap that's coming up to be dealt with. But they have talked about new structures, new economic, new religious, all of these things, but they don't talk about how they're going to show up. They basically just talk about the old ones are teetering because they're so infused with fear. And so they said there's nothing wrong with a bank. They said the first bank was when some hunter asked somebody else to hold their stuff when they went into the woods. That was the first bank. But they say the consciousness of everybody who has ever used a bank is sort of a fingerprint on the idea of the bank. We're all complicit to its structure. And when a structure becomes invested in power and separation and greed, whatever you want to call it, it's formed in fear. And these things need to be reknown in a higher way. There can be a good teacher, an unhealthy teacher, a destructive teacher. There can be a good, doctor, a destructive, it doesn't matter. I mean, I think there's different ways that things can express. And I think if we're doing our best to make our choices beyond the old and beyond fear, we have a much better chance of sort of moving through these times.
Yeah.
So where does this come in, Paul, as far as resurrection? Where are we now? How are we redirecting the guides based on the attunements and the claims? Like it sounds like we're getting a lot of assistance from all kinds of realms that we're not even aware of at this time.
That's what I get. I mean, I get that there's an investment in us making it. The teaching of resurrection is the teaching of the manifestation of the divine self as who and what we are and as can be outpictured in the material realm. And unless we know that that's a possibility, we're not going to claim it. And that's an act of will to claim it. I have choice. We only choose what we believe we're going to get or can have. You don't go to the steakhouse with $2 and expect to get the sirloin. You just don't do it. I can't afford that. It's not going to happen. So what the guides have said is what we're doing here is claiming our inheritance. And they say you don't have to earn your inheritance. You don't have to be a good boy. You don't have to be pious. You don't have to, do all this stuff. You have to accept the fact that you have the right to it, that it's your inherent worth. and that if you are worthy of it, so is everybody else, because you can't have it both ways. And we want to. We want to be right. We want our tribes or our tribalism, and we want to, have people agree with what we think is so. And I think that's all understandable. But I don't know that things are going to necessarily alter if we continue to perpetuate that. So they say God sees God in all of its creation. So it's aligning to that sight, to that awareness, and that is, they say, the resurrected self. And they say that this is happening globally. This isn't just about a small group of people, because finally the changes that we're about to undertake are the result of a shift in consciousness. So they say if one person wakes up to the truth of who they are, they wake up 1,000 more by nature of presence and being. And that's the radiance that you hold, the vibrational tone. People come to my events, and, there was a woman at this last retreat who said, I went to your last retreat and I began channeling, and people open up psychically. I think all they're doing is they're seeing that it's possible. At an energetic level, they're going into co-resonance with somebody who said, yeah, this can be so. And that gives them permission to do the same. And the work that comes through me isn't about becoming psychic or learning how to channel. I frankly don't know why anybody would want to do it. In its truest form, it's stenography. And anybody that's glamorizing it, I don't know what their version of channeling is. It's taking dictation is what channeling is. Psychic work's a little more creative because you get to interpret. I feel your mother around you. I mean, that's feeling and interpretation. If I'm hearing my guides, all I can do is deliver what they say as most effectively as I can.
Mm-hmm. Paul, what's the guides talked about the difference between intellect and wisdom, and it sounds to me like intellect's more sort of tied to the lower realms or the small self. Wisdom's more. What is sort of I guess maybe the most constructive way for us to be able to interact with information?
I mean, I think information is useful. If I don't know how to get to the store, I'm going to ask directions. I want the information. There's nothing wrong with that. And the use of the intellect is a requirement for operating here. But I think people confuse information with knowing, and they're two very different things. Mm. So knowing, the guides say, is realization. And, often in their workshops, they'll say to everybody, close your eyes, think of a time in your life when you knew something. I knew I got the job. I knew I was in love. I knew the kid was sick. I knew they weren't long for this world. I knew the game was over, whatever it was. If you go in and you remember what it was like to know, you'll have an anchor for it. The guides say it's the true self that knows. The small self thinks. And you can find the difference easily by going, okay, I think I know what I'm going to have for dinner tomorrow. I think I know what my best friend is doing. I think I know how long I'm going to live. I think I know what's going to happen in the world. And you don't know. And the reason you don't know is because there's always a question attached. When you're in your knowing, there's no question. And I'm not talking about fraudulent knowing, which I think is, well, I know that person is evil because, you may know that there's ill intent. But when I'm operating in my knowing, it's rarely convenient to me. Mm-hmm. It's really what I would choose. Yeah. So the other thing is, they say, if you go back to that time in your life when you knew, or any time that you really knew anything, they'll say you'll know that you were never afraid. There is no fear in knowing. Even like a hard diagnosis, like, you get diagnosed with a terminal illness. That isn't what's frightening. What's frightening is what's going to happen. Do you understand? What's the process going to be? How long, or what am I going to do, or how are people going to react? All those things. And you can begin to understand this, I think, experientially. This has all got to be experiential. Otherwise, it's just more information. And the guides come through, and it's in their books, with an energy that's usually palpable to people, to the reader, And certainly in the groups, it's there, and people can experience it. And I like that, because I really don't have any interest in people giving me, Paul, their authority. I don't want it. I have enough problems of my own without carrying projections. But if people have their own experience of this stuff, then they can have their own authority, and that is their knowing. When I work as a psychic, which I do a fair amount of, and in the groups as well, the guides will teach, and then people will ask questions of the guides or ask questions about their lives and in relation to the teaching, and often that's about their relations with their families and spouses and children and stuff like that. And so I'm a switchboard. So I'm hearing my guides, I'm tuned into that station. If you want to know what's happening with your sister, I can tune into you, you're the radio station, and then you give me the sister's name and she's the radio station. I'm like the switchboard. I can go back and forth, but I can hear at that level. And it's accurate, or it's accurate enough that, people continue to ask. And my experience of that has been the accuracy of those readings and that kind of information, because I'll often start to look like the people that I'm asked about, help support and verify the teachings, which are far more about spiritual instruction, because I don't think the guides care if we make up with our sister, or get the job or the things that we think are so important. That's our experience here, and we can learn through those.
The book Resurrection, it comes in two parts. First, part one is what was and what will be, and part two is called The Birth of the New, a world made new. We're not talking about the New World Order, are we, Paul?
No, I don't even really know what that is, but I don't read this stuff. So no, a world made new is perceiving with new eyes. Mm-hmm. That's how a world is made new. And I think it's unfortunate that we get stuck sometimes in the glamour that can be and the fascination around all of the depictions of separation, because I think that's really interesting stuff and it's entertaining stuff. You have to go beyond that too to get to truth. Otherwise, I think it's somewhat easy to be caught up, in some rough waters, it came up again this last week, but I'd say this, when I was doing this retreat in Boone, and the questions about how do you forgive the terrible actions of people and things like that. My father was a Holocaust survivor. He was exported from Germany after Kristallnacht in the Kinder transport, and most of his family was exterminated. I carry with me a legacy of collective pain and fear and rage and, all those things. And we all do in different ways. And I think to lift beyond that is to stop contributing to it. That's first and foremost. That doesn't mean, and I'll say this again, if somebody's stepping on your foot or the foot of the one beside you, say, please stop stepping on that man's foot. It doesn't mean we become passive to what we see, but it does have a lot to do, I suspect, with what our intent is. And if our intent is to help and to heal, then that's useful. If our intent is to damn others or be on the right side or what we think is the right side, we're probably going to get stuck again. These are things that I think we all encounter on this path, all of us.
Mm-hmm. That ties in. I was going to ask you, what sort of practices specifically can people start to implement into their life to function more from that upper room, like to start to get an experience with it?
Stop judging. They say what you judge you fear, who you judge you fear. Claim the inherent divine in the one you see before you. I remember when I was first sort of opening up spiritually, people used to say to me, look for the good or the God in other people. And sometimes that's hard, but it works. I think understanding at a certain level that we're all in this together, like it or not, is useful, because we are, even when we don't like it. We're all in this together. Humanity is going through this stuff now. It's not just your neighborhood or your people or your religious group or your, the people at the country club. It's all that factioning. Everybody's here for a reason. We're all here to learn. I don't know that anybody's doing it perfectly. And that level of compassion, I think, is highly useful at this time.
Yeah, that's really
Thank you.
helpful, I think. And as we're kind of finishing up here in just a moment, just for myself too, very curious around areas around just vibration, and the guides speak a lot around vibration and tone and frequency. And what exactly do they mean by that when they're talking about that, as far as these subtle energies, and how does that influence us in this sort of density of this physical reality?
Well, we're in a dense reality. That's the manifest world that we know ourselves in. And the guides say there is one note sung in the entire universe, or any all universe, I suppose, that is source. And everything is source at different levels of tone and vibration. This would be the level of oscillation or vibration. I mean, I failed science, so I'm much happier when they talk about music, because I like music. And I understand a little bit more when they're talking about this stuff. But they say basically that everything, we're in the entire world that we see is comprised of sound and tone, and we're having one experience of it, which is a physical reality. That's how our experience of this plays out. There are worlds, I understand, or levels of consciousness where form is an impediment. The guides say the upper room is the highest level of vibration that we can hold while maintaining form.
Mm.
That's the key. And that doesn't mean that there are others beyond it, and there are. So if you think of tone as having a corollary, so if I'm singing the note E and you guys start to sing the note E, we're all in vibrational accord or attunement to one another. When one begins to lift to the higher, lift the note or lift the sound or the tone of their expression, they begin to call to themselves things that operated like tone or like value. It's that simple. And this has nothing to do with the fashion of spirituality or the jargon of spirituality. It has everything to do with being. It's everything. I mean, the crossing guard may be the most evolved person in the entire community, or the girl at the checkout line, or the accountant at his desk working. He doesn't, all of this other stuff. I mean, it's how we be. How we be. And I don't mean that passively. I mean how we be as who we truly are in expression. That's what shifts and changes the world.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Paul. Is there anything that the guides would like to say to our listeners before we finish up?
I'll ask only one thing. Stop lying to yourselves. Stop believing you are separate because it gets you what you want, because it gets you what you think you want. Stop telling yourselves that you are more or less worthy, that you are more or less worthy than the ones beside you, Learn to listen. Learn to listen with the heart, Learn to listen with the mind. Learn to listen with the mind, not to what you expect, what I'm saying, but to what another is saying in expression. Learn to love them as they are. Learn to love them as they are, not because of their faults, or in spite of their faults, but because they were created, and consequently have a right to be, period. And they're saying period.
Thank you.
Paul, thanks so much.
To all our listeners, highly recommend this book. It's coming out in September. We can't say enough good things about it. It's an experience that we highly recommend for all of you to have.
Yeah, it had a different feel to your other books a little bit. I mean, even though some of the messages I think are, they keep replaying some of them and bring them up, but they're felt, when we read the first few pages, it really felt like a tidal wave. Like it felt really important, and like kind of cutting to the chase a little bit of like,
The time is now.
right now, like let's stop diddle dallying, like this is important. That was at least how it came up for ourselves when we were reading it. Paul, where can people learn more about your work? I know you do a lot of stuff at home too. Where can we send people to learn more about what you're doing?
My website, it's just my name. It's Paul Selig, PaulSelig.com.
We
Paul,
will.
as far as the two other books that are coming up, have you received any messages about what those will entail? I know you said the first 100 pages of the next one.
Well, I don't write them. I sit in a chair and I close my eyes and they dictate, and then the videos are sent off to a transcription service, and then somebody proofs them very, very carefully, and then I go over them. And I haven't read the first 100 pages because I just can't. I'm just too loaded up with them right now, but I'll get to it. They're calling it the Book of Innocence is the next book, which I was surprised about. It's not what I was expecting. But I expect that they're sort of continuing with this idea of what it means to be the true self. And the idea that they've just started, they're talking a lot about the nature of the divine, the true nature of God, which is not what we think. And they're talking so far a lot about memory and the role that memory has in sort of maintaining a belief in separation, and how memory itself needs to be reknown in a higher way. That doesn't mean eradicated, but that the filters that we've used for our individual and collective experience are somewhat faulty because they're so tarnished by fear.
Well, we look forward to that as well. So
Grateful to the guides and grateful to you for sharing these wonderful messages with us and humanity at this time, Paul.
Thank you both for having me. Appreciate it.
thanks, Paul.